From the void beyond mortal comprehension, a rift tore open like a wound across reality, spilling starlight and shadow into the cosmos. Through that fissure came a sovereign clad in green and steel, his armor etched with arcane glyphs and the scars of millennia-long conflicts, the surface reflecting the death of worlds and the silence of dead suns. His mask, cold and flawless, bore the weight of every victory and every calculated step through time, yet it betrayed no emotion, no warmth, only the gleam of inevitability. Around him, the void itself seemed to part, trembling in anticipation, as if the galaxy had sensed the arrival of a mind beyond human ambition. He gazed upon the Imperium, a sprawling cathedral of decay, faith, and madness. Worlds painted in rust and ash stretched beneath him, spires of gold and marble rose like prayers to the heavens, yet the air reeked of stagnation and fear. Humanity's devotion lay like a fragile lattice across the stars, fragile and brittle, its dogma clinging to shattered memories of emperors and saints. Where men prayed for miracles, he measured inefficiency. Where saints burned at altars, he built mechanisms that would outlast eternity. Every cry of devotion became a note in his silent symphony of order, every act of faith a puzzle to be solved. Ships of the Imperium, vast and ornate, crawled through orbit like insects, their thrusters flaring against the black void. Yet even these colossal constructs, designed to project the might of the Emperor across the heavens, seemed trivial under the cold scrutiny of his mind. He calculated trajectories and probabilities, scanning warp signatures and psychic traces with a precision no human or machine had ever known. He knew the weaknesses of empires before their rulers were aware of them, the cracks in faith before the priests had blessed their temples. Every planet, every city, every soldier was a variable in his grand equation, and the solution was simple: absolute dominion. As he descended toward the core of Terra, the solar winds burned around his armor, streaking emerald and bronze sparks across the sky like heralds of the coming rain. Lightning tore through the remnants of ancient warp storms, reacting violently to the presence of his arcane technology, as though even the Imperium resisted his intrusion. Yet he did not falter. His hand extended over Terra's surface, and the planet's crust, the spires, and the burning cities became a canvas upon which he would rewrite the laws of governance, war, and order. And so began the Age of Doom. Ages would pass, and the stars themselves would whisper of the sovereign who arrived not as a savior, nor as a tyrant in the common sense, but as the embodiment of reason made flesh. Divinity trembled at his presence, for gods and demons alike recognized in him a mind unbound by worship, unshackled by loyalty, and unwilling to bow before anything that could not be measured, dissected, and perfected. Where mortals saw awe and despair, he saw only patterns, algorithms, and outcomes. The very notion of miracles was rendered obsolete by his logic, the concept of faith redundant before his designs. Around him, reality seemed to bend subtly, responding to the weight of his intellect. Warp currents recoiled, psychically sensitive species quaked, and the machine spirits of ancient titans stirred as if acknowledging a superior mind. He moved among the stars with a silence so profound it was almost a roar, a presence both terrifying and magnetic. For those who glimpsed him through the veil of the warp, the image lingered, a mask, an aura of green fire, a hand extended not in blessing, but in inevitable dominion. Thus was set in motion a reign unlike any in the history of humanity, a sovereign who would not merely conquer with armies or subjugate with fear, but reshape the very foundations of the Imperium. Where others saw Holy Writ, he saw flawed code. Where others invoked gods, he summoned machines and sorcery intertwined in ways that the galaxy had never imagined. From the rift beyond mortal stars, he descended, and the universe, for the first time, held its breath. Every chronicle, every whispered legend, every astropathic echo would remember the moment when reason took the crown and divinity trembled. Upon the shattered crust of Terra, where the bones of ancient empires lay buried beneath ash and rust, he raised his citadel. It was not a palace of gold or marble, nor a cathedral of worship, but a fortress of dark metal and mirrored skies that reflected the dying sun and the smoke of 1,000 ruined cities. Its spires were jagged, precise, and unyielding, stretching upward as if to pierce the heavens themselves, while below networks of conduits pulsed with green and bronze light, channeling the power of a planet reshaped by intellect. The air hummed with energy, the faint whine of machines, the whisper of servo skulls, the eerie resonance of psychic chains snapping into alignment, all responding to the sovereign who had come to claim dominion. Every servo skull, every ancient machine spirit, bent to his will. Where once they had hummed prayers to the Omnissiah, they now calculated equations, assessed probabilities, and executed commands with flawless precision. The chants of priests became indistinct, replaced by the cold rhythm of servos and the hiss of plasma conduits. Mechanisms that had lain dormant for millennia now awakened, their gears moving with purpose previously denied, and Terra's air itself seemed to vibrate with the resonance of logic imposed on chaos. Even the planet's crust, fractured by centuries of warfare, seemed to yield beneath the weight of his design, channels and tunnels forming a lattice that mirrored his own calculating mind. Psychers were bound, not slain. They were instruments of measurement, their raw psychic energy harnessed and focused through arrays of sigils and arcane circuitry. Warp currents that had roiled and festered for eons were now dissected like simple equations, demonic influence traced, analyzed, and locked into containment fields of green flame and violet light. The very Imperium itself became a subject of study, a chaotic sea reduced to variables, probabilities, and predictable patterns under his scrutiny. Nothing could defy him, not man, not God, not the ghosts of the warp. And yet, despite the perfection imposed, the citadel exuded a terrifying elegance. Hallways lined with obsidian and emerald light reflected his masked visage in infinite repetition, each reflection perfectly symmetrical, each corridor perfectly aligned. Vaults contained not treasures or relics, but the sum total of Terra's knowledge, encrypted and reorganized. Laboratories of alchemy and machinecraft sprawled endlessly, their windows showing fires of molten metal, sparks of arcane energy, and the slow, relentless construction of devices that blurred the line between sorcery and science. Every surface, every spire, every shadow was a testament to the sovereign's vision, reason imposed on the bones of a dying world. From the apex of his throne, a structure hewn from a single slab of obsidian and reinforced with thaumaturgic alloys, he surveyed the galaxy. Across the void, his gaze traced the countless stars, the empires and empires in waiting, the planets governed by superstition and chaos. To him, they were variables, all predictable, all subject to refinement. A fleet of his own design, vessels inscribed with runes of calculation, hung silently in orbit, ready to carry his will to any corner of the Imperium. Every soldier, every servitor, every psychic conduit had been assessed, optimized, and bound to his law. Silence reigned, but it was the silence of inevitability. Where once the universe had been cacophonous with cries of faith, the clash of war, and the whispers of the warp, now there was only the measured heartbeat of logic imposed with divine precision. Every machine, every psyker, every construct knew its place. Every outcome had been calculated, every anomaly anticipated. For the first time in the galaxy's history, obedience was not coerced, nor demanded through fear, it was guaranteed, embedded into the very structure of reality itself. In those early days, even the stars seemed to recognize his dominion. Astral storms that had once torn through Terra's orbit now bent along calculated paths, magnetic fields realigned themselves in accordance with his design, and warp echoes twisted to his comprehension rather than spilling madness across the void. He had not merely claimed a throne. He had rewritten the rules of existence within the Imperium's core, transforming chaos into order, unpredictability into certainty. Yet for all its perfection, there was a weight to his reign. The universe obeyed, yes, but it did so under a gaze that offered no mercy, no compassion, no variance. Life and death were measured, optimized, catalogued. Every act of defiance was immediately identified and corrected, every act of devotion redirected toward utility. And while gods quivered, mortals trembled, and machine spirits chattered in awe, one immutable truth remained. In this silence of perfection, there was no place for the human heart to breathe. And so, under mirrored skies and atop the ashen ruins of a world long sacred, the universe began to obey. Every whisper of prayer, every cry of rebellion, every tremor in the warp was noted, analyzed, and redirected. A new age had begun, one in which intellect, calculation, and sorcery were fused into a crown heavier than gold, a throne colder than the stars. The age of doom, the reign of reason that would unmake gods and reorder reality itself, had begun in earnest. The ecclesiarchy's shrines, once vibrant with burning incense and golden light, now smoldered in ruin. Spires cracked, statues toppled, and sacred texts were reduced to ash under the green flare of doomfire. Where once priests intoned hymns of salvation, there now echoed the cold rhythm of machinery, the hiss of servo-skulls, and the hum of psychic conduits bending to a single will. The faithful wailed, their prayers drowned beneath the chorus of order. The emperors chosen trembled before a sovereign who answered to no god. Even the most zealous Astartes, clad in crimson and gold, found their battle cries transformed into notes in a symphony of inevitability, their weapons calibrated to precision by a mind that calculated every outcome before a thought could be formed. Legions were sent to challenge his throne. They descended from orbital fortresses, titanic engines roaring, bolters blazing torrents of fury against the citadel of dark metal. Yet even as they struck, their purpose was subverted. Each soldier who fell under Doom's scrutiny was remade, armor reforged with subtle glyphs, weapons reconfigured to obey not instinct but calculation, and minds linked to networks of arcane logic that stripped hesitation and doubt. What began as defiance became assimilation. Where humanity's warriors had sought to impose order through faith and force, Doom imposed his dominion through precision and inevitability. The warp itself, long a domain of chaos and despair, shuddered beneath the convergence of sorcery and science. Psychers, once instruments of divine will or heretical insight, were tethered into a lattice of reason that forced their visions into patterns, their raw power harnessed into controlled conduits. Demons shrieked as their forms were reduced to variables and probabilities. They had expected battle and yet faced calculation. Their screams became numbers, their chaos reduced to the logic of inevitability. Even the powers that had haunted humanity for millennia found themselves constrained, reshaped, and catalogued. The very act of faith became an instrument for his designs. Temples, once beacons of devotion, were transformed into data conduits, the prayers of millions converted into energy to power his creations. The Astartes, the very embodiment of martial zeal, became extensions of his intellect, warriors whose armor now carried devices that translated belief into power and obedience into strategy. What had been religious fervor now augmented his calculations, the act of worship itself bending to the will of the sovereign of green and steel. Across the Imperium, whispers spread of the transformation. Planets fell not through fire alone, but through inevitability. Armies mutinied, fleets stalled, psychic storms collapsed under the weight of reason. Entire sectors became quiet, obedient not from fear, but from recognition of an intelligence they could not challenge. Doom did not merely win, he predicted, outmaneuvered, and incorporated. Resistance became an illusion, as those who rose against him were swiftly integrated, their devotion, their minds, their very bodies folded into his designs. In the ruins of a once holy cathedral, a lone Astartes knelt, armor scorched, weapon lowered, and mind linked to the lattice of Doom's logic. He saw the universe in a way mortals were never meant to see, outcomes as patterns, probabilities as chains, life as a single, unified algorithm under one sovereign will. His defiance was not extinguished. It was redirected, refined, and woven into the fabric of the Imperium's new order. The machinery of faith had become a machine of dominion, and every cry of revolt was accounted for, predicted, and transformed into service. Even the stars themselves seemed to bend before his will. Orbits corrected subtly, nebulae shifted their glow along precise trajectories, and warp echoes that had long threatened to spill chaos into reality now twisted predictably around the force of his intellect. The galaxy, which had known only disorder, submission, or blind devotion, began to hum with the pulse of reason imposed on chaos. Each act of rebellion was anticipated, each prayer measured. Each surge of psychic energy redirected into his lattice of control. By the end of this initial campaign, entire systems had been remade. Worlds once proud under the banners of the ecclesiarchy now bore the insignia of doom, a green sigil etched into obsidian towers, glowing with both arcane power and technological brilliance. Cities pulsed with energy, their streets lined with statues of soldiers who had been transformed, not as slaves, but as perfected instruments of his order. Faith had not been destroyed, it had been recalibrated, folded into the greater calculation of inevitability. The chorus of the Imperium's prayers became a single note in the grand symphony of dominion. Where chaos had once been lawless, order now reigned, though its ruler answered to no god. And in this new order, the universe began to recognize a terrifying truth. The Age of Doom was not merely conquest, nor mere subjugation. It was the rewriting of existence itself, a war fought not with armies alone, but with the precision of intellect that surpassed belief, the cold inevitability that rendered devotion powerless. Thus the war of faith and dominion had begun, not with blood alone, but with the transformation of the very soul of the Imperium. And in every shrine, every fortress, every planet, the presence of doom was felt, silent, absolute, inevitable, and infinitely calculating. The galaxy, which had prayed for salvation, now obeyed reason incarnate. No emperor had ever dared to cage chaos, for its nature was fluid, infinite, and maddening, but doom was no emperor. He approached the Imperium not with prayer or ritual, but with intellect sharpened to a blade, and sorcery intertwined with engineering, each spell encoded with precision, each enchantment a formula of inevitability. Across the void, warp storms writhed in futile resistance, demonic forms twisting against the immutable lattice he had constructed, their howls distorted into sequences of numbers, equations, and patterns. Where mortals and gods alike had feared the unknowable, doom sought comprehension, dissecting the chaotic tide until even its wildest currents bent to his logic. Chains of green flame erupted across the warp, not mere shackles, but constructs of impossible geometry, luminous and unyielding. Each link was a command, each knot a pattern of control, and the demons caught within screamed as their amorphous forms were parsed into calculable entities. Immaterium winds that had shattered fleets now whipped around his constructs in obedience, their fury redirected, contained, and transformed into energy that fed the engines of his citadel. Psychers, bound into circuits of thought and will, became translators of the chaos, their visions of the warp rendered legible, mapped, and encoded into the architecture of his dominion. As the chains wrapped tighter around the Imperium, the demons' shrieks became comprehensible, almost musical, their raw power bending to a pattern they had never known. Great gods of the warp, cosmic predators of spirit and flesh, recoiled at the precision of their torment. They could not comprehend a force that was not ruled by fear, faith, or hunger, but by reason. Where once they had inspired terror, now they were instruments, their power funneled through arcs of green and violet light into engines of calculation and conquest. Even the primal energies that birthed madness now became his resource, a reservoir of power tamed for execution rather than chaos. Across battlefields and void space alike, armies of the Imperium witnessed the transformation. The Astartes, their psychic energies once used to sense the ebb and flow of demonic influence, now manipulated the warp with the guidance of the sovereign. Legionnaires unleashed force fields of green energy that held the very essence of chaos at bay, their bolters firing with uncanny precision, guided by calculations derived from the patterns of the Imperium. Starships, once threatened by psychic storms and warp rifts, sailed through the void untouched, the waves of the Imperium bending around them like a river flowing beneath a rigid dam. The victories were not loud, they were precise, surgical, and inevitable. Worlds that had been consumed by demonic plague were cleansed not with brute force, but with the imposition of order, the realignment of psychic currents, and the restructuring of reality itself. Demonic incursions were trapped and stored, their essence dissected and studied, transformed into energy conduits that fueled both war engines and laboratories. Where chaos had been uncontainable, now it was catalogued, quantified, and repurposed. Even the warp's landscape itself shifted in response. Rift storms, previously turbulent and unpredictable, now followed predictable paths, channeled into geometric corridors that connected planets, systems, and fleets. Sigils of containment glowed like constellations across the Imperium, each tethered to Doom's calculations, each link a testament to the control of a mind unbound by fear or morality. Warp-tainted worlds, once lost to the Imperium's grasp, now stood as bastions of power, their psychic energy redirected into matrices of war and governance. Yet within this conquest, there lingered a subtle, terrible beauty. The chains of green flame traced perfect arcs across the swirling chaos, the demons, agony-forming patterns that no mortal eye could fully comprehend, and the warp itself seemed to hum in resonance with his mind. Where destruction reigned before, there was now symmetry. Where madness had spread, there was now design. It was a conquest not only of territory, but of reality itself, a war that transcended flesh and blood, extending into the very essence of existence. In the void, as fleets moved silently beneath rifts of light and shadow, Doom's presence was absolute. Every demonic scream, every psychic pulse, every surge of raw warp energy bent to his will. The universe itself seemed to acknowledge that for the first time, chaos had a master who would not flinch, falter, or yield. And in the hearts of mortals, in the minds of psychers, in the screams of imprisoned demons, the same truth echoed. The warp, eternal and wild, had finally learned fear. Galaxies gleamed under the governance of Doom, vast and silent, as though the universe itself had been wound into a clockwork mechanism. Worlds once bathed in the chaos of war now pulsed with the precise rhythms of his design. Cities rose like geometric marvels, their streets aligned to perfection, their spires glowing with green and bronze energy. Even the stars themselves seemed to respond, drifting subtly into calculated orbits, their light bending to illuminate the monuments of his dominion. Where once there had been turmoil, now there was order, cold, absolute, and inescapable. Every world he touched became a node in a vast lattice of control. Planets obeyed without faith, fleets navigated the void with the efficiency of machines, armies moved as extensions of a singular, unerring will. The Astartes, reshaped and optimized, marched across deserts and plains with the grace of living instruments, their armor and weapons perfectly aligned to his calculations. Psychers channeled energy not for prophecy, but for precision, their gifts harnessed to maintain the balance he imposed across star systems. Civilization, long fragile and chaotic, was now a mechanism of singular purpose. Yet even in this perfection, there was a paradoxical weight. The galaxy was at peace, yet it was a peace devoid of warmth, devoid of hope in the sense mortals understood. Cities hummed with mechanical song, forests of metallic spires and crystalline towers replaced natural landscapes. Oceans glimmered with bioengineered reflectivity, rivers of liquid metal traced precise paths across continents. Civilization was magnificent, but it was sterile, absolute, devoid of the unpredictability that had once defined life. The universe had been tamed, yet in its taming, the spark of spontaneity had been excised. Even Doom himself moved through this perfection with the patience of an omnipotent architect, calculating outcomes, refining processes, and ensuring that no anomaly escaped his notice. Yet beneath the perfection, a subtle truth persisted. The human heart, resilient and chaotic, continued to beat in defiance, subtle and hidden. On distant worlds, small acts of rebellion, fleeting passions, and whispers of discontent persisted, tiny deviations in the lattice of order that reminded Doom, in the faintest echo, that perfection could never be absolute. His fleets patrolled the void with clinical efficiency, each vessel a node in his grand design, yet even as they enforced obedience, the memory of the old Imperium lingered in shadows, the tales of heroes, saints, and martyrs who had once defied impossible odds. Doom had tamed chaos and faith alike, yet he could not extinguish memory, nor the intangible sparks of courage and defiance embedded in human nature. Across entire star systems, civilizations moved as if in a clockwork dance, but in quiet corners, beneath the glow of artificial suns and between the latticework of his cities, life's stubborn irregularities flickered like stars refusing to align. Time itself seemed ordered beneath his rule. Wars, once rampant across sectors, were replaced by calculated maneuvers designed to optimize resources and strengthen control. Star systems fell into alignment, psychic storms were harnessed, and chaos, though constrained, simmered in quiet fear, forced into the equations of inevitability. The universe no longer rebelled. It bent, twisted, and reshaped itself into a testament to his intellect. The Age of Iron Dominion was a testament to power beyond gods, yet in its brilliance, a shadow remained, a reminder that the human spirit, subtle and untamed, had yet to be fully quantified. And so, in this age, the galaxy stood as a monument to reason and precision. Systems functioned with unerring accuracy, the warp bent to serve as a resource rather than a threat, and every living being moved as part of a carefully measured equation. Doom had conquered not just territory, but the very principle of unpredictability. Yet even as he watched from the apex of his citadel, he could sense it, the whisper of rebellion, the defiance encoded into the essence of life, the singularity that refused to be predicted. The Age of Iron Dominion was glorious, terrifying, and immutable in its perfection, but even in its brilliance, even in the calm of a galaxy meticulously aligned, Doom could feel the pulse of imperfection, subtle and persistent. The human heart, the spark of chaos that reason could not eradicate, flickered still. It was a whisper against his machinery, a note of dissonance in a symphony of order. The universe obeyed him entirely, yet its essence, living, breathing, unpredictable, had not been fully tamed. Thus the galaxy became a monument to intellect, to order, and to the inescapable will of Doom. And yet, in the calculated serenity of his dominion, there remained a question that even he could not fully answer. Could perfection exist without defiance, without the chaos that birthed it? Even as planets shone like jewels in his lattice of control, the whisper persisted, subtle and eternal, reminding him that the Age of Iron Dominion, for all its brilliance, was not complete. In the deepest chamber of his citadel, surrounded by infinite machines that hummed with the pulse of the galaxy itself, Doom stood before a mirror that reflected nothing but green fire and fractured steel. The obsidian frame was etched with equations and arcane symbols, glyphs that had captured the essence of worlds, the patterns of life, the flows of the warp, yet in its surface, no face appeared. The mask of iron, flawless and eternal, hid a void, and within that void, the weight of countless victories, conquests, and manipulations pressed like a tide against the immutable lattice of reason he had imposed. For all his omnipotence, all his intellect, he faced a truth unquantifiable. Within himself, there was no soul to rule. He had slain gods, dissected the warp, restructured civilizations, and imposed order upon chaos, yet the machinery of dominion could not fabricate the essence of life, the heartbeat of existence. The psyches he had bound whispered truths he could not calculate, their voices echoing like wind through the hollow corridors of his mind. Memories of humanity's defiance, its courage, its boundless unpredictability, surfaced as anomalies in the lattice, data points he could control, yet could never fully understand. Even in conquest, the universe reminded him that intelligence without empathy, logic without understanding, could never achieve true mastery. The warp returned, not as a tempest of rage, but as revelation. It surged through the citadel, a storm of emotion, color, and psychic resonance that no algorithm could bind. Demons of old and gods of forgotten empires roared not in malice, but in clarity, exposing the illusion of control that had underpinned his reign. The forces he had captured, quantified, and enslaved pressed against the lattice of his calculations, reminding him that existence was not a formula, and that life's essence was defiant, fluid, and untamable. Each pulse of the warp struck the walls of his citadel, bending the steel, flickering the lights, and resonating with the memory of every soul he had sought to master. In that storm, the mask of Doom cracked, not a shattering of iron, but a fracture within his mind, the recognition that absolute dominion had a price no intellect could calculate. The perfection he had imposed, the galaxies aligned, the warp dissected, the Astartes and Psyches integrated into flawless obedience, all of it lacked the spark that gives meaning to